Good morning, Steve Weber here. We are having a little bit of a technical challenge with the connections. I'm hoping that everything is okay, but the internet seems to be a little bit hiccupy so far this morning. So we'll just hope that everything sounds okay and we're coming through broadcasting. Let's see. Today, welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show. I am Steve Weber. I am the host of the show, and we've got a fun show planned for you today. I've got a guest, Ed Barr, environmental services expert. We're going to talk about sustainability, the environment, and things that we can all do to be better citizens on Mother Planet Earth. And upcoming this week, and I got a monologue, I should mention that, and it's going to be my kind of views on the environment and how they've evolved over the last few years. So that'll be kind of a short and sweet little monologue. Now, tomorrow, Stacy Redfield, the author of The Pilates Effect, she has written a book that chronicles the evolution of that industry, and it's fascinating because it sputtered along for years and years and years under Joe Pilates, and then boom, it all just exploded in the 90s. So that's a great read, and we'll talk with the author tomorrow. On Thursday, Throwback Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, I'll be coming on and I'll be doing a broadcast. And I'm going to talk about some of the Weber family traditions, and I'll have some of my siblings join me. So that's going to be a fun day. And then on Friday, Brian Quinn, the author of Crush Your Career, is coming. Brian's written a book on what you can do to get your resume in top shape. How do you go about the interviewing process? How do you get an interview? How do you go about the interviewing process, and then everything else that happens there? So that'll be on Friday. And we got guests lined up for the first 3 days of next week. So I'll tease you with those later on in the week. All righty. Now, today is Tuesday, and that can only mean one thing. Oh, boy. I'm having issues with this. All right, everybody. We're having a little bit of I'm having challenges here on my end. I don't know if I need to do a restart of my computer and get a better connection going or what. But let's try it one more time and see if we can bring Brandon on board.
Steve! Oh no, Steve, can you hear me? 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 Oh,
Yeah,
there
I hear
you
you.
go. There you go. You're good now.
Oh my gosh, I think I got to do a restart. I'm having massive trouble here with my computer. So, but take it away since you're here. What do you got for us, Brandon Schaefer?
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here, man. And my message aligns with Ed's message. I saw your update earlier this week saying that he was going to be on. And all I had really to share today is something short and sweet. And it's going to hit home right in your heart, right? So do it because it's the right thing to do. We all know the right thing to do. And especially when Ed gets on, he's going to talk about the environment. He's going to talk about recycling. He's going to talk about things that we can take ownership of within ourselves that are going to make a big impact for the greater whole. So be responsible for you. Do it because it's the right thing to do. That's really all I have for you today, Steve. And I hope you get something from this. I know it's all great stuff. And it's so important just to be socially responsible in your personal life as well as in your business life, to your friends and to people you don't know, to be responsible for you. So I hope you get something from that, Stevie.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, I think that's what Ed and I are going to talk about. By the way, Ed and I went to grade school together. First grade is when we met. So we're going to have some fun just hanging out and being old friends.
Nice, man. Nice. I'll stop back and check it out. But listen, do it because it's the right thing to do, right? Do it because it's the right thing to do. That's my message of hope. That's my message of inspiration. That's my message of motivation for the American Gumption show, spirituality going wild today. And I look forward to catching up with Brian on Friday with you as well.
All righty. Have a great week and have a great Thanksgiving, Brandon. Thanks for joining
I'll talk to you later on today, Steve. Thank you.
Okay. All righty, everybody. I don't know if we're back. I'm going to have to, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a quick restart of, let's just simply try to restart Chrome rather than this computer. So I'm going to disappear for about 30 seconds and come right back because my internet is not working good at all. Let's go ahead and try this one more time. All righty. How am I doing today? Now, are you hearing me better? Are we hearing me? Let's give a thumbs up. I hope this is going to work. It feels like it's working better. For whatever crazy reason, I had some technical issues. The first couple of months, the first month or two, I had technical issues every day, but I thought I had most of that behind me. But hey, life is like a box of chocolates, broadcasting live daily. All righty. So welcome back to today's show. I apologize for the little mishaps we had. Hopefully it was mostly on my end. And but anyway, here we are. Now, again, Ed Barr coming up in just a minute or two. Well, in about 5 minutes. I want to talk about the environment today. And I want to tell you about how my views have changed over the years. And I would say probably about 5-6 years ago, I kind of had a shifting position. Prior to that, I had viewed a lot of environmental things as kind of like alarmist and maybe overreactionary. But I had one specific thing that happened in my life that I got involved with a particular client on a particular project, and it kind of changed my views on it. So I'll get to that in just a minute. But first of all, let's just define what the environment is. And this is an ecology definition. It says the air, water, minerals, organisms, and all other external factors surrounding and affecting a given organism at any time. You know, it's just like, it's our environment. It's like planet Earth, Mother Earth, Earth in the balance. It's like the whole place. And so that's really what we're talking about when I'm talking about the environment, this Earth that we live on, and how do we keep it a healthy place for all of us to live and work and thrive in, and for our children and their children. All right. So clearly in the last 150 years, the planet has seen the most radical change and the most impact from humans than in any other period, primarily because the population has exploded, but the the way everything changed in terms of technology and manufacturing and production, and you ended up with these big, huge plants. Airplanes have come along, all in the last 150 years. Trains, the transcontinental train line was 150 years ago. Cars and highways, all these concrete infrastructures that go everywhere, concrete, buildings and cities. I mean, there were cities, London from years ago, and London from, 200, 300, 400 years ago was no walk in the park. It was a polluted mess. So it's not like suddenly things were really good, a couple hundred years ago, but the last 150 years with technology and the invention of, trains and planes and everything else, and people being able to connect it and communication. And so everything has really pretty radically changed in the last years. Dumps and landfills, huge places. Like I mentioned, the industrial and the chemical plants. I remember as a kid, driving by on the highway, and you go past the chemical plant, you could smell it. And you're like, oh, that don't smell very good. And you saw houses sitting off on the side of the highway, and people lived there, and they smelled that, day in and day out. So that was not a good thing. I mean, and I thought, well, what does that do to you if you're, a little kid thinking this? What does that do to you if you're breathing that every day? Is that good for you? Dams, windmills, nuclear power plants, our power production. Obviously, we need power production, but there's all these massive structures that, affect the world in different ways. Look, last summer, the last couple summers, wildfires, there has to be a better way than half of a state burning down and towns getting completely burned out. So how are we going to manage our forests going, forward? It was there, there used to be a place where you could go in and cut down trees. Well, there was clear cutting. That obviously isn't a good solution, but what if you go in and you thin things out on a regular basis, and you capture that carbon, that wood, and you use it for certain things, and you do other things with it. But then you don't end up with these massive fires. From my understanding, Europe has a more progressive approach to managing their forests than the United States does. So, it made me think about USA standards versus European standards versus the rest of the world. Obviously, the United States and Europe kind of lead the way in terms of being environmentally conscious. And then there's the other places, China and Russia, which have very different standards, and they have very polluted places from what I understand. I've not been there to see that and experience it myself, but, there's India, you hear stories about it not being a very, massive, billion people, and, they don't have the same kind of infrastructure and ways of handling things that we do here. So in simplest terms, the environment is the air and the water. Who doesn't want clean air and who doesn't want clean water? I think that's just a human common sense. We need to, take care of our water supply and our air supply. So I mentioned a project I got involved with several years ago. A friend of mine, a client, Scott Levy, he has been an advocate for removing the 4 lower Snake River dams. The 4 dams on the lower Snake River for many years. And these dams essentially are big hydroelectric power plants, but they're kind of low grade power suppliers, meaning that they're not like big, giant, massive producers. They're sort of like backup producers. But what happened is it turned this river section into a 200-mile long lake. And what happens is all the salmon that used to go up and down, they don't come down any longer. So they built these ramps to get them upstream, but getting them downstream, it used to be a flowing river, and now it's like a lake. And so the nymphs, the little, juvenile salmon, they have a hard time getting out there. And so you look at the numbers, and the population of salmon has just plummeted. He's been an advocate for that. I've done some work with him on that. I became educated. When I first heard about it, I thought, well, we need dams, to fish. Okay. But then, you study it and you get into it and you go, oh my gosh, this is really, we're going to eliminate salmon from, being in existence in that part of the country. And we've pretty much done that over the last 50 years. And so, there's a group of people, Scott being one of them, that, is very sincere about seeing these dams removed so that, the salmon can recover and, fill up this big part of the Western continent that fish thrived in for millions of years. And in a course of 50 years and 4 dams basically wiped them out. Is that the kind of world we want to live in? That's the questions that we need to ask ourselves. There's extreme views. If you look at the 2 political parties, one party paints the other as people who don't want clean water and don't want clean air. And then the other party paints the other group as people who want to shut down all commerce and business and not do business any longer. And these are both extreme positions because obviously they're not true. So what is that balance and how do you find that in the middle? 100 years ago, industries used to just dump pollutants directly in the rivers and lakes. The stories about the Chicago River catching on fire because it was so much, petroleum products basically sitting in there and the whole river catches on fire. Emission standards have dramatically changed things. Our air is still polluted, but think of how bad it would be had, emission controls on production plants and automobiles not been put in place. And this year with COVID and the way everything kind of just came to a screeching halt, in India, they said we could see the Himalayas for the first time in people's lifetimes. There was so much, haze and pollution that had settled over the air that when the commerce and the production stopped, it was like suddenly they could see the Himalayas, hundreds of miles away, and they hadn't been able to be visible. So I guess I don't know what the answer is. And all I know is I want clean air and clean water, and I want sustainability. I want to do things differently than we've been doing them so that, our Earth, Mother Earth stays in the balance and we can live, our, children can have healthy lives. And I moved to Montana and lived there for, 11, 12 years. And in compared to other places in the country, it's very pristine and clean. And, and it was fun being there and I liked it, but at the same time, it's like you come back and you live on the East Coast and the California, these are problem areas. There's just so many people. So I don't know what the answer is, but hey, maybe Ed has some of those answers. All righty. Well, that's it. I just wanted to kind of update you on that. A couple, years ago, I was more like, there's no big problem. And now I'm like, there's like a big problem. And what is the answer? I don't know, but let's see if we can figure that out. Alrighty, let's invite our guest onto the show. Ed Barr, welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show. How are you, my friend?
A little tired. I came and started my day today at 4:00 with rounds. So
You've been up and about doing things, being a productive citizen here in our country.
So the only advantage is I don't get to wear a suit. I wore this Eagles top, and if you know how good the Eagles are doing this year, people are throwing things at me. So anyway, glad to catch up with you, Steve, and happy to talk trash with you. Try to figure out the best place to put my camera here.
Good.
So
the way it works here, Ed, is I got 2 things that happen right when I welcome a guest on board. First, I read a little short bio that I have for them, and then I play a first-time guest welcoming song. So if you ever come back, you will never get this theme song again. Will you indulge me and let me read your bio and play the song?
Go ahead.
All righty. So Ed Barr has spent his entire professional career working to keep hospital environments safe and clean. He worked directly at several of Philadelphia's top hospitals, including Thomas Jefferson University Hospital and the U of P, University of Pennsylvania, in roles including Director of Environmental Services and Manager of Support Services. Ed has played an active role in the Greater Philadelphia Association for Healthcare Environment. He is serving as a member of the organization's board, and he's one of the association's past presidents. Ed currently works for Sodexo as the Environmental Services Director, working with account managers on program implementation and operations. Several years ago, Ed started posting articles daily on LinkedIn about environmental issues, about U.S. history, and about a few other topics that we'll get in and talk about. Finally, Ed is a graduate of LaSalle University, and he is a graduate of Archbishop Wood High School and Our Lady of Good Counsel Grade School in Southampton. Both of those schools are my alma maters. Ed and I met in first grade 50 some years ago. Can you believe it? Anyway, Ed, welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show.
Thank you.
Now, let me play that song and then we'll get into our fun stuff here. Here it is, the first time guest theme. Have you ever had a marching band welcome you onto a broadcast before, Ed?
No, nothing like John Philip Sousa to get the blood stirring. So that's good.
Exactly. So, well, good. Well, welcome. You and I, we go back a long time, and then we got separated for a long time, and in 2014 we reconnected, and I was able to meet you and the people at the Greater Philadelphia Environmental Hospital Services Group and Association, and then since then we've kept in touch.
That's true. Yes.
You how did what did you study in college that you ended up going in and working for these hospitals and in this field all your life? I mean, did you have some kind of a environmental degree? What was your studies?
Well, that's a good question. No, I actually went to school for political science, public administration. I had thought that I would start my path as someone as a professional in government, as opposed to the elected officials that run the government. And it just was not to be. And so it's always good to have a plan B. And I met someone who got me involved in the field of environmental services. There's no real set field of study in the United States for this particular profession. So you meet a lot of people who end up coming here through different career paths. I guess that's a good way of doing it. So that happened to me, back in 1983, and haven't looked back since. Keeping a hospital clean and safe is a little different than, cleaning your kitchen or cleaning your bathroom. Initially when I thought, learned of this, I thought, well, this is sort of like the janitors, and yet it's not sort of like the janitors. It's like there's operating rooms and a whole bunch of other areas that need cleanliness that you just don't even, I never even thought about. Could you just sort of give people an overview of what keeping in a hospital environment is clean is like? Well, I mean, you touched on it. There's different levels of cleanliness and different aspects of the profession. For instance, when we went to school way back when, they had a janitor, and he went around and he had a big ring of keys on his belt and went around and kept things clean. And then you have the idea of housekeeping, and housekeeping has to do more with domestic work or hospitality. Like if you go to a hotel, they have a housekeeping department that cleans everything. Environmental services is, we think, is the professional aspect of the housekeeping profession. In the sense that we have to keep the environment clean, patient rooms, the support areas, operating rooms, and so forth. And it's a challenge because people come to the hospital generally aren't at their best, especially now with the COVID, the pandemic. It challenges us to really do our best to make sure that people come in and they don't leave with anything more than they came in with. So that's it in a nutshell, Steve.
One of my guests from a few weeks ago, Heather Holmes, has a consumer product company called P2 Probiotics, and basically it's a probiotic cleaning that gets down into a kind of a biofilm. Is biofilm something that you're concerned about in the hospital?
Well, we would look at it as a chain of infection. In order for a human or a host to pick up an infection, they have to contact it from a surface or someone else. So we attempt to keep those surfaces clean and essentially break the chain of infection. So when we clean, we would use hospital-grade disinfectants to make sure that the environment is clean. And in some cases, we might kick it up a notch and use a bleach-based disinfectant. But that's part of the challenge for us, is to go through and keep it clean every day.
Yeah, because obviously these germs get in there, and if they start spreading, then you have an environment that can make people more sick than when they arrived in the worst case scenario. So a lot of important job, a lot of pressure there. What are you doing currently? Because your Sodexo is this. And am I saying that correct? Is that
Sodexo? That's correct.
A French company, but a huge company, has its fingers in all kinds of things, not only hospitals, but food and service and, different places like that. What is your current role? What are you doing these days?
Well, I accepted a job director of environmental services at Holy Redeemer, which is a hospital in suburbs of Philadelphia. And Sodexo is part of they hired us as a management team to keep the hospital safe. So I've been with Sodexo. It'll be 3 years in March of 2021.
All right. Well, I remember Holy Redeemer because that was the hospital that was close to our home. So if we ever skinned our knee, we didn't go to the hospital. We just got a Band-Aid put on by our parents. But if you broke a bone, you might have to go down to the hospital. All righty. Well, good. Hey, so anyway, the reason really why I wanted to get you on here, Ed, was, we connected on LinkedIn several years ago, and I don't know when it was. I don't think it was originally 6 years ago when we connected, but the last couple of years, I started noticing you posting articles, and oftentimes it was about the environment, about sustainability, but then there was like U.S. history, and there were some other themes that you would, I thought, where in the world do you find all these articles to post about? And obviously just, talk about your passion, which is the environment, because you're not just talking about, you never talk about hospital stuff. You talk about, issues that affect all of us on a day in and day out basis. So what's your philosophy about all of this?
Well, I mean, I always like to read, and I always like having books around. And with the creation of the internet, it's opened a whole new world for people who have to, who like to look for information. And the biggest challenge I find is people throw a lot of stuff out there, but how much is accurate? When we sold books, there was a whole process to go through to get something published. Now all you need is just your laptop, or I guess all you need is your smartphone, and you can put stuff up there and start a website. So I was working for a company prior to Sodexo and doing environmental work in hospitals, and I remember there was a marketing person who gave us a hard time about posting things on the internet. and she was referring to social media. And at the time, I was on LinkedIn, but I wasn't really posting anything. And I thought it was kind of foolish because I know an awful lot of people that live and die on posting, Facebook and you know, whatever, Twitter. I mean, they're constantly putting things out. But I kind of kept to my own and was reading at LinkedIn. And then I came across a story on a history link. It's a history.com. And it was about a gentleman by the name of Witold Pilecki. And he was a Polish army officer who fought the Nazis. And we don't know a lot about the Poles in World War II. Most of our readings, at least in the United States, are on the Allies or the Axis powers. And we don't really look at the other countries that fought. But this army officer was fighting for the Polish underground, and he decided to go to Auschwitz voluntarily, get himself thrown in there because he wanted to know what was going on. And he uncovered the truths of the Holocaust, and he then escaped from Auschwitz and tried to let the West know these atrocities were taking place. And then the war ended. His health suffered horribly, and yet he went back into Poland to fight Stalin. And Stalin ended up executing him a few years after World War II started. And I was floored by reading this. And I thought, wow, here's somebody, talk about guts. He wanted to go into a concentration camp and, and lived to tell about it and tried to, save people. And I thought it was a tremendous story. So I figured out how to post it on LinkedIn. And then as I would read things, either historical, environmental, leadership, business articles and things, I would just start posting it. And I never really realized how much I posted till I was here at Holy Redeemer. And the gentleman that runs the print shop, he linked up with me, and he came up to me and he said, I just am floored by the amount of stuff that you post. And I was kind of laughing, and I thought, wow, I just don't even, I read it, and then you just hit send, and boom, it's on there. And I'll, usually put a little bit of an introduction on it. And my philosophy, Steve, is not to put in anything editorial or controversial. The closest I ever got some pushback on was about a few years ago when President Trump was talking about building the wall, not getting funding, and he was going to impound funds and take these funds and take them from the Pentagon and put it into the the wall budget. And that being I've studied political science and government in college, so I still follow it. Fascinating by how the mechanics of government works. So there was an article that talked about how the president impounds funds and what he has to do. And I read it. I thought that was pretty interesting. I just thought it was a question of, if he picks up the phone, says, send this funds over here. But they actually have to have a formal review. And then the Pentagon has to say, this is going to impact it. And this is the process for doing it. And that's all it said. So I posted the article and said, in case you were wondering, this is how the president can impound funds and spend it on other money, on other programs. And I had some friends call me up and say, why are you posting that pro-Trump stuff? And I'm like, not pro-Trump. It's just a procedural thing. So that's about the closest I've gotten to some controversy on things. So I did post something on why PowerPoint is for people that can't present. And I got some pushback on that. And I felt strongly about that because I've been to too many PowerPoint programs where people throw up a PowerPoint, then they proceed to read from it.
Right.
So I think there's some validity to that point. And had the person who, made the comments, I then went in and commented back that I wasn't saying it was bad. It's just that some people are using it as a crutch, and you should be able to stand up there and give your point without the PowerPoint. PowerPoint should add to it, not just be the end all.
Right. So I've noticed, that you don't editorialize. You just basically are putting up information, and the main categories again are the environment, and then U.S. history would probably be your second strongest one, and then you mentioned like leadership and just kind of business in general. and obviously you're just kind of following your interest. You're doing things that you are, like reading about and doing that. So I appreciate that here you are just trying to share information, and yet our country is so polarized at the moment that if the information just explains procedurally how the president was going to do something, people looked at that as an endorsement for what that was all about. So anyway, it's unfortunate that we can't even have a conversation about like how things work, and whether they should or shouldn't is a separate topic. But discussing the mechanisms for how things work, that shouldn't be controversial. But of course, everything today in today's world is controversial.
Well, I posted a couple things on close elections in U.S. history. What comes to mind is the election of 1876 that wasn't decided until at that time. The inauguration was March 4th, and I believe it wasn't decided until about March 3rd. And that had some serious consequences for the country, and I won't get into that now. But again, there have been close elections before, and I think people generally don't really know history anymore, and it's kind of sad. I don't think we teach it in schools. Um, I've always had an interest in it, but generally, there's very few people who I find that I can talk to about history, or even who are on the same level as me as talking about things. And I'm not talking about obscure facts like what were the names of the folks that fought in the 20th Maine at Battle of Gettysburg, but just just a general knowledge of these things. It's kind of sad. But I post a lot of travel things, recreational things about national parks and hiking and outdoors and things like that. If I find something interesting on a city or something that I think people should visit, I'll certainly post that. Because I think at some point the pandemic will end, and people will want to get out and do their natural lives. So I try to keep give them interesting things to read.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and let's focus a little bit on the environment, just because that's your main interest. At least most of the articles, it seems like more often than not, I would say that's your number one theme, and then U.S. history would probably be your number two theme. But I did a little monologue at the beginning of the show, because my thoughts have evolved over the last couple of years, and I shared how the salmon are essentially going to disappear in the Northwest. I had a client who is an advocate for that, and I did some work with him on it. And I just educated myself. I took a deep dive into it, and I learned about it. And I went, geez, are these dams really a good thing to have here? And you just sort of ask the question, and it becomes sort of controversial, because some people want to keep them and some people want to get rid of them, and it becomes a political issue in terms of, like, if you're getting rid of it, there's jobs that are affected, and so these things become very complicated issues. Once something is in place, it's almost impossible to undo. Now, I went into a political conversation a little bit with this. I was trying to keep it in the environment, but share with me some of your thoughts on where the world should go. I mean, the fact that the Himalayas were suddenly visible for the first time in 50 years kind of gives us some indication that we're probably not doing everything correct.
Well, this is a real limited time on this podcast, so I'll try to briefly address some of the issues. Brandon said it best, and I'll paraphrase, to do the right thing. And I think there are times that we don't do the right thing, that we need to. Certainly in terms of making decisions for environmental stewardship. I always felt that it's best to, there was a Kenyan saying, I used to use it when I would give presentations, that we should leave the world better for our grandchildren. And I think that's a good barometer. But if you go back to, you mentioned some of the pollution, I think the big issue that we have is the United States and Western countries have had their issues with pollution, and certainly have made tremendous strides. back in 1970, when they had the first Earth Day, I think you were talking about the Cuyahoga River caught fires a few years before that, and Lake Erie was so polluted, it was said that was the sea that Christ walked across because it just had so much pollution in it. And we've done a great job in cleaning these things up. Back when we were in grade school, Steve, I mean, you bought leaded gasoline. I can't think of the last time I could even pump a car with leaded gasoline. Everything's unleaded. There's pollution devices in cars and, smokestacks other than some, coal plants. They generally are regulated, so they're not spewing pollution. So we certainly have made great strides, but where I see issues are, it's just that there was a book by archaeologist, anthropologist William Rathje called Use Less Stuff. And he published this a few years after he published the book Garbage. And for those of you who don't know Rathje, he was just a wonderful guy. He was a mentor of mine. And he went in and he spent the latter part of the 20th century digging up landfills. And he would use them to prove, one, to study as an archaeologist, but two, to prove that things don't degrade in a landfill. For degradation to take place in a landfill, you have to have air, water, sunlight. So when we take things to a landfill, what do? Well, we collect the water off it and we treat it. So the water's drained off. It's not exposed to air because we dump topsoil on it. And that certainly precludes any sunlight. So these things will sit there year after year. We need to do a better job at just some fundamentals. And one of them, I would say, is managing our solid waste. Right now in the United States, we combine garbage and trash. So garbage I would define as the organic matter, and trash would be the packaging. I certainly would argue excess packaging that we use for things. And all that gets mixed together. So if we truly had good landfills, they would be non-organic material and they would stay in place and you could do a lot of things with it. You wouldn't have to collect the leachate and the methane gas off it. And then you would use the organics to get fertilizer and other things and have it degrade as God intended it to do. So I laugh when I drive around and I see people raking leaves and putting them out on the side to be collected up. So what? So they can go in a landfill and be entombed? There has to be a better way of managing what we do, and we don't do it very well. I think a lot of reasons are just we don't have the infrastructure, and so that becomes a monetary issue. The fact is, Philadelphia, one of the articles I posted was that Philadelphia was collecting trash, the city, and they were just combining it with the recycling. And that happens, that's the dirty little secret of recycling, is we collect a lot of things and it's not always recycled. So
people, are you suggesting that people take their bottles and cans and separate them all and then they all get collected and then at some point they all get combined back together and thrown into the same landfill that they've always been going into?
Well, that happens.
Yeah.
That absolutely happens. I mean, people, I've seen it in the workplace. You set up elaborate recycling programs, and then the housekeeper goes past, and they combine it all together, and puts it in the same container, and it goes in the trash dumpster. So that's a bit disconcerting.
Yeah.
So,
when we finished high school, I went directly to work and didn't pursue my college career for a few years. And while I was working for a company that manufactured stuff, chemical process equipment, made things out of steel. And there was a guy there, and they used to call him the garbage man because he had some kind of a dream that he was going to create some kind of a machine that would take garbage and turn it into some kind of a reusable fuel or some kind of a product. Now, this is back in the late 70s. Since then, I've gotten involved and I've heard of people doing these same things, and yet nothing ever seems to happen on it. clearly we are technologically advanced enough to do this sort of thing. Is there some kind of a big trash lobby that is keeping these products from coming to see the light of day?
Steve, I don't think so. There's certainly, for something to be viable, back in the 80s, early 90s, the big thing was trash to steam. We were going to take all the trash and turn it into energy, and the result, the problem is that it took more energy to create the energy to burn the trash. So at the end of the day, you really weren't that far ahead.
Right.
I think for a solution to work, it has to be economical. So let's look at what we can recycle. Corrugated, or what we call cardboard, there's a market for that. And they can collect it and put it in big bales, and then you can ship it to mills to reuse, or they can send it to Asia where they can reuse it. Aluminum cans, it's much cheaper to take aluminum cans and process them and make them instead of, from the ore that you would make it from. Steel, scrap steel, huge market, because it's, they can take that stuff out, melt it down, and make steel. So there are some successes. But there's some real things that are just dogs. Glass is tremendously difficult to make money on, because if you take it, you have to separate it by cullet or color. And then you have this very, very heavy thing that you have to send back to a glass company, when a glass company can just take sand and water and heat and make it from scratch. Carpet recycling. Getting it back to the mills, you're talking about dead weights that you're sending back, to a mill to reprocess, when they can make it from scrap. So I would say that if you can make money off it, find a way to make money off it. Sometimes you have to legislate some stuff. And we do have the legislation. I mean, states have mandatory recycling numbers. Here in Pennsylvania, we're supposed to be at 35%, and we're nowhere near that. And the state doesn't want to come down on businesses and and counties and townships that are trying to make these things go. So the trick is one, is to get a balance, in your whole outlook on nature, and two, you have to figure out how to do it without becoming too onerous financially. So going back to your guy, the environmental guy, there are people that have taken plastics and things and pelletized it and tried to sell it as fuel. And I've seen a few of those programs, but in the end, I don't know how viable it becomes.
So economically, it just isn't a technology that works at this point in time. So,
yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Europeans, and the reason the Europeans are ahead of us with packaging and landfills is because lack of space. I mean, they just don't have the room. I mean, you've flown between here and Montana. I've flown between here and California, and there's a lot of space out there in the United States. The issue becomes is, how many people want to, look out? You want to look out and see the Himalayas. You don't want to look out and see the landfill. So it's putting the landfills. I mean, that's a big money maker for the large waste companies, to site one, because they're relatively inexpensive to run. They don't cost a lot, as opposed to running an incinerator, which can be very expensive in time and technology, just getting it to the right thing.
Yeah. So really, there's not simple answers. But like Brandon said, like if we just start using common sense, that will, on an individual level, that will, create an awareness, and it'll kind of force businesses to start thinking about things differently. If individuals are saying, hey, I'm not going to put up with this. Bettina, who is a regular fan of the show and checks in, she's got this long quote here, but she basically is just talking about, she doesn't want to buy food and stuff if it's wrapped in tons and tons of plastic. And so that's just one, simple thing that we could do, is like start to eliminate the packaging. And yet we, who wants to buy something that's not like pristine and brand new, and the way it looks pristine and brand new is if it's all wrapped up and, double wrapped and triple wrapped. I don't know.
Well, I don't have a problem with packaging. I have a problem with excess packaging. And I'll challenge you to go to a store and you're going to buy something very simple and you find it's elaborately packed because the marketing folks got involved and they put it in there so it's also enticing. I mean, if people want to make a difference, you need to start at the beginning and start simple. And right on my desk, I have something that, um, you know, this is my coffee mug. This is one of several that I have. This happens to be from Mount Vernon, so I know you're not disappointed in me, Steve. But every day I take my coffee cup and go and bring it in. And the only place I'm getting pushback now is because of the pandemic. Is Dunkin' Donuts um, won't let me bring my own cup in. But I went to Wawa, which for those of you who aren't from the Philadelphia or Mid Atlantic area or Florida, is a local chain, and I had my coffee put in there this morning, and I buy it. So you have to live this stuff, and I don't. Another example is if you look in the trunk of my car, I have bags. So when I go out, I always carry my bags with me, and it becomes a joke with my family, because they know I don't take a bag. I don't take a plastic bag. I bring my own. And people are, conditioned to give you a bag. And even if I go to a store, I went to pick up a prescription at the pharmacy, Walgreens, yesterday, and they started to put this little thing of eye drops in a bag. And I just looked at him, and the guy said, "Oh, that's right. You don't take a bag." And I'm like, "That's right. I'll carry it out in my pocket." So we can make a difference individually, and I think we need to do it by living an environmental lifestyle and doing stuff. Certainly, if you have room, I would encourage you to start a compost pile. If you garden, instead of buying fertilizer, get the compost pile, and they have these little drums. They're not terribly expensive. You can do that, instead of buying fertilizer or collecting rainwater. There's, it's not that expensive to do, and you can use that to water your plants. It also creates, protects from excess runoff. Green roofs. Uh, I found one business, no, a couple businesses that had them, and I thought they were worthwhile, to collect off the rainwater. Um, Even as far as, pushback from the issue I have with how hospitals is that hospitals. I've known a lot of clinicians in my life, and I can honestly say I can't think of one that didn't want a healthy outcome for their patients. I mean, they go into that, and they work very hard to save people's lives and to help people. Yet I run into people who don't want to do environmental. They will throw out supplies that are not used and be very wasteful. Not all, and this is back this place. Every place I've been, and they don't make the same commitment to the environment. So you make a commitment to make a healthy patient, but what happens if you send them out into an unhealthy environment? So there has to be that connection, but people need to do it. And the other thing that bothers me is the not in my backyard. I'll give you an example. If you're familiar with the Philadelphia area, King of Prussia is about 15 miles north of Philly, and there's no real way to get up there other than taking the Schuylkill Expressway, which opened in 1947 and was obsolete the first day that they built it. So it's constantly backed with cars. So the Transportation Authority has been trying to build a rail line from Philly, where people live, up to King of Prussia, where people can work. And the pushback from the people that live along there has been awful. And I'm thinking, what could you possibly object to having a train when you have all these tens of thousands of cars running up and down? A train would be great. It would run along the right of way. It would bring people in to an area that needs jobs. A colleague of mine who works at a casino out that way has a very difficult time getting staff because you can't get them in. They take a bus. The bus is delayed because of traffic. So we need to really commit to do the right thing and not be so obstinate because it's going to disrupt you. The trail in Southampton, the old rail line, Steve. Some people were fighting back about that. What could be better for the environment than putting a walking and riding trail? I mean, the train line hasn't been used in 50 years. put the trail in and stop fighting this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. For whatever reason, well, I kind of mentioned it earlier on, like once something's in place, nobody ever wants to change it, or somehow there's like a legacy that it has to stay that way forever and ever and ever. And even if it's a bad idea originally, they don't want to, kind of take it out. Like these dams that I mentioned out in the West, they're low producing dams, and they're, the fish are not surviving as a result of it, but it's like they're there, and so they're not going to get undone. So it's a complicated issue, and I'm not, I don't want to pick on one particular subject, whether it be a train line or rail line, because everybody wants to protect their own thing the way it is. And unfortunately, that doesn't move us forward very quickly.
No, it doesn't. And I just think it's an individual commitment we need to make. And then that individual commitment becomes a commitment of our society to live a greener lifestyle. Call it whatever you want, a sustainable lifestyle. I will say that there are now in colleges, they're offering studies of sustainability and environmental issues and things, which they didn't have when you and I went to school, because I've worked with some of them in my previous life. And I've actually ran into some really, really sharp people and worked with them who really want to better the planet. So I think the next generation may be more committed than we were.
Ed Barr, this has been fun. We're not going to solve these problems, but I'm glad we had this conversation. It's something that if we all increase our awareness. And who was it? You were talking about somebody who wrote a book or said something about we need less stuff. I think that's like another, big lesson. We don't have time to get into it now, but we have an awful lot. We were raised with the idea that if you have more, it's better. Well, we got way too much, or we have more than we really need. And so I think there's going to be, I would hope that there'll be an awareness that, more stuff isn't the answer. And, I don't know. It's a crazy world we live in, Ed.
It is. But I think it's time that we made it less crazy and, did our best to use less stuff, keep nature in balance. One of the things I've learned is that if you kick nature out of balance, it has a way of self-correcting itself, something that may not be advantageous to mankind. Mm-hmm. So I would say that we need to get our act together, and we've done some great stuff, but there's a lot more we can do.
Well, Ed, thanks for joining us. This was fun. I mean, I think this environmental issue is bigger than what as we got into the conversation, I'm like, oh my gosh, we could go on and on and on, and we could take a deep dive into certain areas. So anyway, let's leave open the idea that we'll have another conversation in the future, but you won't get that, John Philip Sousa song.
All right. I'll send you a list of a couple songs you can open up for me. Okay.
Hey, I have one last question. And I'm going to preface it with, this happened to me. So I'm going to ask if it happened to you. Were you ever sent down to the principal's office and you got the 1x1 yardstick whacked against your buttocks for misbehaving?
Yes, it was, that was, corporal punishment was quite common in our era. And it wasn't the wood one. It was there was some sister that had an iron ruler. That one hurt.
Yeah, I got that across my knuckles in second grade.
Yes, I believe it was Sister Whacker. So
for something I didn't even do, Ed. All righty. Well, we survived the corporal punishment, and it turned out okay. But that too has evolved. You didn't raise your children that way, and schools are treating children much differently these days. So anyway, good times, good memories. This was a fun conversation, Ed. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. We'll see you again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, that was Ed Barr. That was fun. I enjoyed that. and Ed knows a lot about the environment and has, he has common sense ideas for it. So we'll get him back sometime. Maybe it'll become a regular thing that we talk about the environment. Who knows? But I had fun doing it. So, alrighty, everybody. Well, have a great rest of your day. Tomorrow, Stacy Redfield, the author of The Pilates Effect. And then on Thursday, I'll do a Throwback Thursday, Thanksgiving traditions at the Weber household growing up, and several of my siblings have promised to join me. So we'll have fun. And then on Friday, Brian Quinn, the author of Crush Your Career. So that's it. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thanks, Bettina, for checking in with your comments. We always appreciate you. And we will see everybody tomorrow.